to listen to Captain Ron Kuban next. He's graduated from the Royal Military College in Kingston, beautiful campus. He served with the PPCLI regiment and has had nearly 35 years of experience in the field of communications management, emergency disaster management, bent towards communications, I suspect. He's worked globally, but also across Canada. He's served or taught at many of Canada's finer institutions, and he's the president of the Canadian Risk and Hazards Network. Also, he was part of the team Canadian representatives at the Geneva Congress for the Global Platform on Human Disaster Risk Reduction. Please welcome Ron. Going to come and share with us.
Still, do you hear and those who are online? I just wanted to show off my tie. We're talking about emergency management. This is the first recorded emergency plan of Canada. No one. Well, just putting it up there. All right. Oh, can you hear me now? I was just bragging about my time. That's the message. No. All right. This morning, what I'd like to do is I want to talk about something that a number of you have already touched on, and will again touch during the afternoon. And it's aid to the civil power or assistance to the civil authority. In other words, how does the military get engaged in common, local, municipal level emergencies? There's a definition, and it's right from the National Defense Act of the NBA. What is aid to the civil power? I'm going to start with that term, and then I'm going to switch to assistance to the civil authority or aid. And essentially, it's calling out the troops, right? And that's what most civilians would recognize the term to be. There is a legislative foundation, and I won't get too deep into it because your eyes will move backwards, but it does go back to the War Measures Act of 1914, where it dictated in some regard how the military is going to be used within Canada. Right? And that's the key, not externally as a military force. Next, in 1988 came the Emergencies Act, and it kind of changed a few things. The significance of that is not significant for our conversation, so I'm going to skip over that. But the key thing I want to relate to is the National Defense Act, which came in 1985, been revised since, and it defined clearly how the military in today's world is to be used at local level. So the questions that typically arise is, when will you call the military? And of course, why? The when is when a civilian or civil authority, and read that as a municipality, a territory, or province, is unable to cope with the situation under its own powers. Okay, so in short, it's resources, its personnel, its jurisdiction, etc., has been exceeded, or rather, it's reached its limit, and it needs assistance from a resource, i.e., the military, that has a little bit more capacity than otherwise. Initially, as you can see in the definition, it was intended for law and order, and then it's been broadened to include also emergencies and disaster situations. Now, why do it? The short answer is because the military can provide. And it provides personnel, it provides physical resources, it provides skill that otherwise is not readily or period not available at local level. And again, the key thing to remember is it does provide resources at a time where the local authority is unable to cope with the situation. It's not willy-nilly, hey, we need more troops, we want to reduce our costs, etc., and call in the troops. So, the making of the request is really important to understand. Why? Because let me start with the negative first. A municipality cannot call up the military. It's just not done. This municipality goes to the Attorney General of the province and says, hey, we reach a situation whereby the our resources are not able to address. You can.
Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah. So we're not unable to address our situation, and therefore the province now has a responsibility and has the jurisdiction to call up its own resources to support the municipality. And it's at that point when the province or the territory is unable to provide sufficient resources to address the disaster at hand that the military is called. The Attorney General is the only one who has the authority on behalf of the province to reach out to the Chief of the Defense, CDS, and say, hey, we need some resources. We need extra help. So here is an interesting dynamic. Attorney General, Chief of the Defense Staff, make that contact directly. Yes, Chief of the Defense Staff cannot turn down a request for assistance. But the interesting part is, according to the National Defense Act, the Chief of the Defense Staff, not the Minister of National Defense, has the authority to decide what resources will be made available during the situation, for how long, and for what role they will be applied. The Attorney General can request and also identify the type of resources the province needs and for how long they're likely to be involved. And again, the Chief of the Defense Staff makes it a little bit more concrete by applying specific resources for a specific period of time. So again, I want to emphasize this: Chief of the Defense Staff must respond to a request from a province through the Attorney General. Must respond to that. Oh, sorry. Down the bottom, in committing resources, the Chief of the Defense Staff also commits an individual who then becomes the commander on the ground for the military resources, and might appoint a number of individuals that are called officer in immediate command. So visualize a situation where you have a wide area disaster or an emergency, and you need to have commanders in different locations. Those are decided by the Chief of the Defense Staff and the officer that he appoints to command that deployment. So a couple things to remember: when you have military personnel deployed to a particular situation, they are under their own command. They do not respond to individual, the mayor company, or the reeve, or the mayor, members of council, etc., or even the chief of police in a particular municipality, and tap the soldiers and say, hey, we want you to do such and such. It does not happen. They respond, continue to respond as military members within their chain of command, and it's their chief commander that has the responsibility to coordinate and liaise with the municipal or the provincial individuals who are responsible for that disaster site. In some situations, individual soldiers are deputized as constables. And what it does, it gives them specific powers. And that's typically when you have civil disobedience, etc., as we've had in Ottawa recently. They're deputized, and therefore they have powers to act in a civilian environment. Now, I want to relate something that's a little delicate, but it's a point of pride, I think, for us, that our system is very different than the American system. When we deploy, let me go in reverse. When in the US, military forces are deployed in assistance to the civil authority, invariably they go up the totem pole, up the chain, right? So whoever is responding from a military perspective is now that jurisdiction that takes command, that takes authority. So as they move up, the governor sends the troops from the state to a particular site. It's the governor that takes authority over from the site, from the municipality, etc., from the district, and they operate like that. If it's a National Guard, then it becomes the president who takes the authority. And it becomes a little messy when you look at case studies across the United States. Forgive the expression, a little gross pissing contest, egotistical fights, etc., etc. And it's a total mess. We have adopted and maintained a very, very efficient system whereby those at grassroots level are in command. They continue. They were before, they are during the emergency, and they continue afterwards. What do I mean by that? When the military resources are deployed and they support a particular municipality, a town, a village, etc., the elected officials of that municipality have been elected by their people. They know their municipality, they know the resources, they know the issues, and this is a key one, they will continue to live there and govern there after the military leaves. So the military is always in support in Canada. We do not take over, right? The interesting part as well is when the request is made by the Attorney General to the Chief of the Defense Staff, the Minister of National Defense and the Canadian government are somewhat out of the loop. So all of a sudden it becomes there's always politics, I won't be that naive, but it becomes an arm's length issue for the Chief of the Defense Staff to handle the matter from a military perspective, from the Canadian Armed Forces. There are 4 types of assistance that are provided by the military, and you can see that. Can anybody not see it? Here in the corner? That'll teach you. All right, let me read it to you. I hate reading to adults. So, military aid to other government departments, right? And I'll get to that in a minute. Military aid to the civil power, and I've talked about aiding the civil control of a municipality, like in riots, etc. Military aid to the civil community, and finally, training, logistic assistance to the civil power. I'm going to get into those in a little bit more detail. And again, for those who cannot read, your glasses. All right, there are different examples to be had, and those are headings, and underneath those, there are so many subcomponents, I won't even get into it, but I just want to show you how diverse our military assistance can be when it comes to issues within our country. So, natural disasters or emergencies, that's the obvious one, right? That's the one that comes to often. Floods, forest fires, bushfires, snowstorms, slides, minor cases of earthquake, etc., but not yet. The other one is technological emergencies. We have various rather wide and extensive power outages. We had Y2K, for those of you who are dare I say young enough to remember that. Social disobedience, not necessarily riots, but in our history we've had that. But illegal protests, we certainly have that, and we had it recently. Penitentiary riots, I can tell you from experience back in my time, 1975, New Westminster Prison, the inmates decided to have a shindig and they went into a riot mode. The staff, the correctional services staff decided, hey, this is not for me. We don't have enough resources. They backed away and almost went on strike. They called us our battalion, my battalion, from Victoria and said, get in there. And we put the perimeter. It is another story, remind me, that tells you about some of the challenges of doing that. There's also health-related emergencies, and a number of previous speakers talked about that. There's an element of security, and I talked about the penitentiary, but also the Olympic Games in international medias, for example, the G8, etc. The military augments the local police forces. Keyword, augments, not take over. And supporting other agencies. And there are diverse agencies, typically at federal level, anything from monitoring iceberg flow because of shipping and commerce, etc., to monitoring illegal drug interdiction, human trafficking, and so on and so forth. All of those things within and for the people of Canada. And finally, evacuation and human aid. I want to take a side strip and just remind you, just in case we forget, the role of government right across our country at whatever level we're looking at is the protection of the citizens. Whatever jurisdiction you're at, government's primary role is the protection of the citizens. There are three key roles that the military provides for Canada. One is our internal jurisdiction, our internal boundaries, obviously the military protection of the country. The second one is the assistance that we have that we provide in collaboration with our allies. So, for example, NATO, the direct connection we have with our US allies, and so on and so forth. And then the third one is humanitarian assistance. So anytime there's an issue, and right now we're going to Haiti and assisting there, so that kind of support. Now it's important to raise that when you realize the size of our military is now smallest it's been in at least 5 decades. I'll get to them just shortly. So here's the challenges. The military that we think of is so stretched on the ground. It is amazing that they can do what they have been doing to date. It only speaks to the commitment of the individual soldier on the ground, that he or she can provide that type of commitment despite being in what I call deployment fatigue. I can tell you from experience. You go out for 6 months peacekeeping, come back for a couple of weeks, go out for a month, come back for a month, go out for a couple of weeks, so on and so forth. That's the kind of commitment that we now depend on our troops to continue to do in order to address our emergency situations. The other one is unrealistic expectations. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a little funny, but it's not. So I'm commanding troops, brought them into the perimeter of the U.S. penitentiary. Guys have weapons. They've been taught how to use them. They know exactly what to do. So we have correctional services officers saying, okay, you see this area here, that's confinement, right? And if anybody escapes that, we have a little fence on, about 100 yards away from the perimeter. And if they go over there, yell at them, tell them, if you cross that, you're going to be at risk. And then about 200, 300 yards beyond that, there's a taller fence. And if they get there and they start breaching, you yell at them, hey, stop. If you don't, I'm going to shoot at you. And if they go beyond that, they're now into the community. And I remember vividly, like it was today. One of my troopers looks up and he says to the guy, oh, okay, so if they cross that fence over there, we can shoot them? Oh, no, you just, and they had their policies. Our troops were clear, black and white. You cross the line, we shoot you. We've been trained to do. So there are some things that our military is placed in where they're not ready to do. Not for lack of interest. They haven't been trained. They haven't been given the resources. They just been placed there because nobody else can do it. And there's unrealistic expectations both ways. There are civilian entities. There are some politicians, and if they're in the room, my apologies. I call things the way I see, whereby the situation is such that the locals on the ground, the civilians, like you and I, do not understand the military mentality, the psyche, the military cohesiveness, the way they operate, etc. They just see that as horsepower. Come on down, do the job, get up. Doesn't want to. And last but not least, there's poor communication and cooperation. Dare I say the word ego between the commander and the elected official, etc., etc. We've had that case, and I'm not going to embarrass anybody by raising the individuals, etc., where a general on the ground and a provincial official went head to head in the middle of an emergency because they couldn't get their hoop together in order to figure out how to do it. So those things do happen. So generally speaking, and I'm saying this as a Canadian, not as an ex-military. Generally speaking, military assistance, i.e. assistance to the civil authority, is well received and often very welcome because by the time they arrive, the water level, if I can use that analogy, has risen quite extensively. They are of assistance. They do make a difference on the ground. Why? Because they bring in skills that are not available, resources that are not available, extra horsepower, extra pairs of hands, and a commitment to make a difference. Come hell or high water. And by the way, that's the military ethos, right? Whatever's coming at you, well, we got a job to do. It's often at a reduced or no cost. That's one of the interesting comments that often is thrown at me when I talk about this is, okay, so what is the cost? Well, the cost is presented, it's tallied up by the Chief of the Defense Staff, presented to the Attorney General. And guess what? By the time it gets to the Attorney General and it comes back to the Minister of National Defense to figure out things, it's either waived or reduced significantly. So the real cost, and that is part of the challenge, if municipalities knew the actual complete holistic cost of bringing a military unit into play to deal with their situation, they will probably appreciate it even. But last but not least, if you remember, as I do rather vividly, the Somalia affair and the consequence of that, where the military reputation was tarnished enormously. Since then, it's been building and building and building. Why? Because of the commitment, dedication, and effort that the military has provided on countless of situations. So here are some examples. On the top is drug trafficking, top left, top right and bottom is human trafficking, right? Ships that come across, both options, left and right. In the military surveillance, identify those military personnel on the ground when these individuals land on our shore. They assist the RCMP, they assist the coastal resources, whatever we have out there, to sort out who is who in this group of strangers. Evacuation, the traditional yellow bumblebees, search and rescue, they do tremendous amount of work, more often than not talked about, but they are. The one on the right is, they do search and rescue both on ground and over water. Emergency situation from a natural disaster, floods, snowstorm, fire, they're always there. This was the top left is illegal fishing. One ship is loading fish, illegally caught fish, onto another one so that he can disappear and then carry on. On the right is pollution control, right on our shores. The military, the Air Force monitors the pollution control. The picture at the bottom, I might get a giggle or two. Why doing the monitoring of iceberg. Well, you know what? When they don't have GPS, right? When they wander off track, they put at risk our commerce, they put at risk our transportation routes, they put at risk our people. So the military monitors them. Drug trafficking, again, the Air Force comes in and assists the RCMP in identifying locations and try to assist in capturing these criminals. All right, so I've covered a fair bit. What I want to leave you is with this key message. The military is available. It does come because requests are made. It arrives at the request of the Attorney General, at the direction of the Chief of the Defense Staff, and a commitment of a whole lot of people like you, individuals, who leave everything despite the stress they have on their family life, military life, social life, etc. They come in and they assist. We need to use them by all means because the situation demands it in a lot of cases, but we also need to respect that that is a really cherished resource that we cannot abuse. Thank you.